Project for today is going to be this WEN 4,000 watt generator. It's got a 212cc engine. It's pretty much a Honda clone engine that's on it. You'll have to excuse the background noise. The furnace is running. It's pretty cold outside today, so that'll be coming on and off as we're filming here. But probably got to go through the carburetor on this thing, and I know it needs a new fuel line. This thing is pretty much hard as a rock right here, so we'll do that, and then probably go through the fuel tank here and clean it up. I'm not sure how bad that is. It smells okay. It doesn't look too bad in there. It's a little bit kind of yellowish looking fuel, but I don't see any water or rust or anything in there, so that's a good sign. So we'll probably try to run that. But the main thing will be going through the carburetor, and then we'll give it an oil change and maybe a new spark plug. We'll see what it's got in there for a plug. But I'll get you set up and we'll get started. So the first thing I'll do is pull this air cleaner off of here. Usually the air cleaners on generators aren't too bad. These do usually have the foam style though, so you do have to just make sure they're not rotten. That foam will get kind of rotten where you squish it and it doesn't pop back, so you just want to make sure when you push your thumb into it, it doesn't just stay crushed in there. That's usually a sign that it's rotten. And we had a little baffle in there that fell out. So then we've got a couple of 10mm bolts, one here and one on the outside. And then on the back side under here there's a 8mm bolt to pull the housing off of there. We'll pull these 10mm nuts off first. And the one over here underneath the cover. And this is just a breather for the fuel tank that connects there. And there's a breather for the engine up there. And that pops off. And these chokes usually slide up and off like that. And this linkage for the throttle, you just turn that and you can pull it out a little bit, and then it just pops up and out like that. And then this is just the spring connecting it. I've got the fuel turned off. I'll slide this fuel line off of here. This is another one that you really don't usually use that type of fuel line. It's usually you want a rubber black line to go on there, because the UV will actually eat these pretty good when they're clear kind of yellow like that. And we got that off of there, so we'll get that on the bench and get that tore apart and clean it up. We'll take the float bowl off first. That was really tight. That was just a 10mm, and that looks pretty grimy. I'll throw all this in the ultrasonic cleaner. Otherwise you can just use carb clean. But there's a little bit of that green, kind of like a algae crap that grows in there from the ethanol fuel. That's why I always preach that you don't want to run ethanol fuel in this small engine stuff. It gums up so quickly. Our needle looks like it's got some goo on it, but it doesn't look too bad actually. It's just got some more of that green goo on it. Sometimes the rubber or whatever they make these needles out of will kind of deteriorate from the ethanol, but this one still feels pliable. Sometimes they get hard as a rock, so then they won't seal anymore. And the float doesn't look too bad. It's a little bit gummy in here, but I've seen a lot worse. It stinks, I could tell you that. That old gas varnish smell, kind of. And we'll take that main jet out of the center. Gotta find a screwdriver for that. These are just a flathead screwdriver on the main jet, and this one already feels like it's been rounded off, like somebody was stuck in there. You turn and it'll tear that. It's just brass, so this one's probably just gonna have to stay in there. It is best if you can get them out, but you don't really want to be completely mashing them. And I do sometimes try after I get it out of the ultrasonic cleaner, because I run that at about 150 degrees, so sometimes the heat helps get them out of there. But otherwise you can just run wire up and down through it and then carb clean, kind of soak it with that, and a lot of times you'll get it clear enough that it runs fine. But this one was really plugged up. There, we got the wire through it. You can kind of see it comes out in the center there. And then we've got a jet here that we've got to get out. So we'll take the idle adjustment screw out. This is pretty much the same on most of these Honda clones, and then on the actual Hondas they'll have the same style carburetor. So it's kind of the same procedure. Cleaning them. And this pops out of there. These can be kind of difficult to get out sometimes too. And then there's little tiny O-rings on here that sometimes break when you pull it out, but this one seems okay. And then there's a hole in the end and a hole there that get plugged, and then that's when you get the surging a lot of the time, or it won't idle, which most generators you're not idling anyway, but it'll still get that surging, especially under load, because it still uses some of the fuel from the low speed circuit as it's running at full throttle. So that's why you'll get the surge even though it's on the low speed side of the carburetor. So that seems pretty good. And then I'll just soak this whole thing, and then we'll spray it out with carb clean, and I'll run wire through the stuff again. And one thing I do also is you take like a Q-tip and you can get that down inside where the needle seat is and spin that back and forth, and that'll polish that up a lot of the time. But I don't do it till after I've soaked it, so I get most of the grime out of there and I'm not stuffing that back down in there. So I'll get this soaking, and then I'll bring you back when I pull it out of there. So another thing we'll do quick while that carburetor's soaking is I got a clean pan here, and we'll turn the fuel on and see what we get out of it. Make sure there's no water or anything, which right away it looked like some water came out of there. So that might be a problem. But this should be the lowest point on the tank, so hopefully most of the water would come out as we're draining a little bit out right now. So I'll shut it off, I'll go dump that, and then we'll see. As you can see, the water is down in the corner here. It'll collect. You can see it looks like air bubbles, but that's actually water floating in the fuel, because the fuel will go to the top and then it'll just collect in the bottom. We'll do it one more time here, see if we get any water out of it this time. It's looking like it's pretty clean now, so that might have been, if it's been sloshed around, the water can move around, but normally it'll always collect back at the lowest point because the water's heavier than the gas. And that actually looks okay. So I think we'll be okay that way. This thing's been sitting long enough that it should have collected down in there. And then we'll grab a fuel line to replace this one with. Well, I've got a new gas line on there, and the carburetor's done cooking, so we'll get that out of the ultrasonic cleaner and start reassembling and getting it cleaned up the rest of the way. And we got the littler parts in this basket here, and then the carburetor's still laying down in there. These ultrasonic cleaners, they do okay, but they're not, stuff doesn't come out like sparkling clean. You still have to rinse it off with carb clean and wipe stuff out and stuff. And a lot of people seem to think these are like a magic thing, but they're still better than just scrubbing normally with carb clean and stuff, but they're still not perfect. I use that gunk carburetor cleaner in it. It comes in like the 1 gallon like paint cans, but that stuff's getting so expensive now. I might be looking for an alternative, especially something that works better on this ethanol type stuff, because that stuff used to work good on it, but now it seems like it's not quite as good. You can kind of see there still has a green tint to the stuff after being in there for about an hour. So if you know of anything better, put it down in the comments. I'd be happy to try it, especially if it's cheaper than this stuff, because this stuff's gotten to be like, it was like 20 bucks a can, and it takes 2 cans to fill this. This is just about a 2 gallon parts or ultrasonic cleaner. But we'll get cleaning this up and then I'll throw it back together. So I got everything cleaned up and wiped out. Had to use a wire brush like this and then just pick at a lot of the stuff with the screwdriver down in here, because this one was really bad. It was really caked up in there. So the ultrasonic does help loosen all that up though, is one nice thing about it, so you don't have to try to scrape so hard at it. So we'll put our float bowl gasket back on, and I did clean up this needle too. And there's a little spring that goes over the top of the needle that you don't want to forget, and that just pops in to the float like that. And I took a Q-tip and run down in the needle seat too to clean that up. And we'll test that. I've got this little pop-off gauge. This is just a gravity flow, so anywhere a little over 5 pounds is fine if it can hold that much. So this one's looking good. You can just take a piece of fuel line and try to blow in it too, but you don't actually get a lot of PSI by doing that. Then you kind of want to make sure that this drain is in the right direction in case you ever want to drain the carburetor, which this one sat like this, so that'd be off to the side where you could still get at it, I'm thinking. We'll put this back in. I never did get that main jet out of the center. It was pretty stuck in there, so I'm hoping that doesn't cause us problems. And this one doesn't have an adjustable slow speed jet. Usually you can adjust one right here. You can drill this cap out and get into there to get it out of there, but if we don't have any problems with it, I'll just leave it alone. And the one thing is you usually end up heating and stuff to get that out, and I don't really want to if there's gas around and stuff like that, so I'll just leave it alone. Then I got this cleaned out good, and you can look through here with a light and see up through it, then you know it's clear. And the O-rings were still good on that one, so shove that back down in there and put our idle adjustment back in. I was having a little trouble getting that seated down in there all the way. Sometimes those O-rings will swell a little bit, so if you just kind of take the back side of a screwdriver and push down and hold, otherwise it'll kind of spring back with those O-rings. And now we can put this in and it'll actually line up. You don't have to be too picky on the adjustment for the idle on a generator. They usually just run wide open anyway, unless you've got like an economy mode on them or something, which this one doesn't have. So that's all back together. So now we can throw it back on and see if it'll fire up for us. So we'll put our gas line on first. And you want to turn that clamp down because the air cleaner will end up hitting it. I've had that issue before and couldn't get the air cleaner to seat good, or I've seen them where they come in and somebody just tightened the air cleaner down and there was a gap right there, so you'd be sucking dirty air, which is not good. And just the opposite, putting the linkage for the throttle back in. That slides back up. Put our choke back on. And we want to put our breathers back on. Most of the older ones don't have the gas tank vent deal that goes there. This one's actually not even hooked up. It comes up to here, and there's a filter on it. It would have came up to the top of the tank here, but this one's just breathing to the atmosphere instead of through. It doesn't really affect anything. We'll get our bolt started back here. Normally when I'm putting something together like this with multiple fasteners holding the same part, I'll end up just getting everything started and then tighten everything down once everything's started. Otherwise you might fight getting one fastener at the end or something, and then you got to loosen them all up anyway. So that, we'll turn the fuel on. A lot of times I like to turn the fuel on a little bit ahead of time just to make sure we don't have any leaks on the carburetor or anything, but this one I'm pretty confident that we won't. Make sure I put that in the right way. There's kind of witness marks from that stuff poking at it. Usually they're so clean like that, sometimes you can't tell which is front or back, but you don't want to put it on backwards and have the dirty side sucking all that stuff through. Now we'll check the oil real quick. These don't hold very much oil, so it's important to change the oil on them pretty often. That actually looks really clean. I did change the oil on this one probably maybe 2 years ago, but I don't know how much it's sat since then, but it looks like it's pretty much brand new oil, so I'm guessing it didn't get used much. Most of these generators, they're for a backup, and if the power ever goes out, nobody ever uses them unless they use them for camping or something. So I don't think this one's got a heck of a lot of hours on it, but these China-made generators, they're not too bad. They're not going to last you as long as if you get a Honda or something like that, but the Generacs seem to be really good generators too. The older ones, I don't know about the newer ones. A lot of the newer stuff has gone downhill on quality, so it's kind of hit or miss whether something's good anymore or not. When you think you found a good brand, they change manufacturers or something, and then it ends up being junk the next one you buy. So, but I've seen some of those Generacs with thousands of hours on them and they're still going, so the older ones I know are good for sure. Well, I think we're ready to see if it'll fire up for us. I'm just gonna run it for a little bit and then I'll bring it outside and run it for a while. I usually put an electric heater on them so they have a load on them. But I got the choke on, the gas is on, and the switch is on over here, so we'll give it a shot. That seemed to run pretty good. It's got a little bit of a hiccup in it, but that's usually just because you can't adjust that low speed. If you were able to adjust that, you could smooth it out, but with the emissions stuff they put on everything, it makes it so you can't adjust that. Plus it's got older fuel in it. I'm guessing that fuel's at least a year old. So we'll bring it outside and I'll put a load on it and see how it does. So leave it running for like a half hour or something and burn some of that old fuel out of there. It's not, well, I guess it is registering on the gauge, but so there's probably a gallon or so in there at least. These are pretty easy on fuel, so that'd take a long time to burn that out of there, but it's good if you got one sitting around, if you could burn all the fuel out of it and put some fresh non-ethanol in there once a year or so would be a good idea. So we'll bring it outside and see how it does. I've got it outside, I'm gonna fire it up, and I've got a heater plugged into it, so we'll do a load test on it. We'll see if it'll fire up as easy as before. It started in one pull last time, so that was pretty good for having a dry carburetor. Watch that volt gauge, it's at about 120 volts right now. We'll make sure it doesn't drop when we put the heater load on it. So that's 1500 watts I'm running with a heater. It's still running at 115 to 120 volts, so that's alright. I'll let it run out here for 40 minutes or so and run some of that old gas out of it. We'll come back and check on it. I'll let it run out here for about an hour and burn a lot of that fuel out of there. They're still showing a little bit on the gauge, but I'll probably burn half the fuel out of there that was in there. But it seemed to do good. When there wasn't a load on it, it did surge a little bit, but I'm thinking a lot of that's to do with that old fuel that's in it. So I think once I run all that out of there and put some fresh stuff in, it should be fine. But that's going to do it for this one. If you like this sort of thing, like the videos and subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.